Cool. So thanks everyone, and hi. So I'm Jean-Michel. My first experience with Linux was a Red Hat 5.2 box set a few years ago, and it didn't work with my GPU at the time. But still, I've been in this club for quite some time, and right now I'm developing a media art software. And so this is kind of the topic of this talk, and I will explain what is this all about. So what's media art? So I think that this place, where this location is actually a media art place. I know if there are people here who are part of the buildings organization, but I guess there are sometimes concert, live shows, which involve like various kind of media that is not only sound, but also video, smoke, all kind of stuff. So I have a small gallery of various things to show you, so I hope it's easy to see. So media art is stuff that you can find, for instance, in museum installations, in concerts, in art installation, exhibits, that kind of thing. And traditionally, this has been a very, very Mac-ish place. Recently, we are starting to have more and more things that make Linux available for it, so I'll talk a bit about all of this, but here are a couple of pieces. For instance, this one uses fake smoke clouds made with foam, I think. I don't think I know the word, which are lighted by Macs and Raspberries. There are stuff like, for instance, theater performances where people get their body signals sensed and used as part of the performance. Various things with video effects, all kinds of stuff. Stuff that use 3D engines and game engines like Unity 3D, Unreal, and more recently on Linux Godot. Stuff with dancers, singers, and everything together. So it's a lot of really sometimes weird contraptions. For instance, this one is a kind of table where you lay on the table for the performance, and then you get some vibrations sent to you, and it uses Pure Data, which is another free software which runs on Linux. Video art, media art. This one is interesting. It uses Raspberry Pis to make a, I never remember the English word for that thing where kids jump, but if someone knows the word. Hopscotch, yes, thanks, exactly. So it's an augmented hopscotch where you jump and light effects and sound effects happen, and this one is entirely running on a Raspberry Pi. Stuff where you have smoke generators, stuff where you control robots with joysticks. It's really random stuff. Modular synthesizers, watching plants grow. So there's really a lot of varied artworks that people do. And yeah, they are starting to do them more and more on Linux. So from this gallery, 50%-ish run on Linux, and the rest are all the other older stuff, which sadly is still on Windows or Mac, but we are trying to get there. So a big question is, how do people use Linux in these conditions? And first, what are the conditions of production of a media artwork? So very often, it's in the dark. So recently, operating systems have started to offer dark modes. Well, Windows 95 also offered dark mode, and so did Enlightenment. But it's super important for people here to have, for instance, computers where you don't have light elements. And now it's good, but like even 2-3 years ago, it was still complicated. And for instance, there's people, they really want software that will maybe not fit the theme of the computer, but will always be dark, because if you have something super light or in your dark room like this, it's absolutely horrible. These people, they project stuff on big screens and with many loudspeakers, on many sound installations, that kind of thing. This is, for instance, in Lyon, in France, there is La Fête des Lumières, a light festival in every year. And media artists will project stuff everywhere in the city. It's really beautiful, and I really recommend if you want to go there one day. So yeah. So where can you find media art? You can find media art when teaching, for instance, kids and children, making some education work, and well, that kind of thing. You can also teach artists to use this kind of media-ish software, and you can also find media and more like developers. So this is at FOSDEM. This is the Open Media Dev Room, which has been there since times immemorial. And this is a picture I snatched from the Kodi website in 2015. So it's always a nice place to go if you are interested. So every year it's there. There is also the Linux Audio Conference if you like to come and present stuff related to this. So even if it has audio in the name, there is not only audio. There is all kind of artworks that are being presented, all kind of media technologies. So, and yeah, it's kind of most developers are attending this conference. It's really where most things happen. So to give you some examples of our video, okay, secure connection failed. Okay, if SSL wants to let me show videos, I will. Otherwise, these are the these are some video recordings of art performance that were given at Linux Audio Conference 2020, which, well, occurred over the internet. We all know why. But hopefully the next editions will go back to real life, because seeing an art installation in real life is super cool. But for instance, there was some nice stuff with a German artist, Peggy Silop, who put a big ice block which will drip over the course of the conference, and you could listen to the sound of the art block dripping. I know it sounds weird like this, but it's actually quite nice to see and to listen. There is a lot of artistic work to make it nice. And this is what the people, the artists I work with, do mostly. House media art, and specifically house media art on Linux. So sometimes there are a couple of issues, of course, with all the audio media server. So for instance, for the software I develop, this is some of the issues I encounter. So sometimes it will not work with FLT on Fedora, and sometimes it will not work on CentOS Stream, and sometimes blah, 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 blah. Well, there's always something that breaks, right? But it's okay. It's okay. We can still make something that works on Ubuntu, where 85% of the users are. So I think it's important to take a look at what other platforms do, because so they were here before mostly, and well, a lot of tools that artists use comes from these platforms. So very interestingly, on macOS, for instance, most of the tools are and have always been macOS specific, but some of them are really, really super used. For instance, VDMX allows to do video. Okay, I can show video like this, I guess. So VDMX allows to is a macOS software to do basically light art and video art. It's a very complex software, so I don't know why my link didn't load. Oh no, it loaded here. Okay, so for instance, VDMX is a Mac software which looks like this with all sorts of toggles. It doesn't fit at all in the macOS GUI framework, but I mean, it's quite used, and there's a lot of chance if you've seen some video clips of music that there was some VDMX in it. Another one is Quartz Composer, without the typo. Quartz Composer is an old macOS software which allows to very easily create visual systems and by patching objects together. So this is a very common UI metaphor in this media art domain. You patch objects together, so it's in a sense similar of some part of the Unix philosophy of having one thing program do one thing and do it well, but here it's like sub-programs inside one main host program, and most media artists are used to this. And for instance, in my country, France, if you go to a music conservatory, pretty much everywhere you can start learning Max MSP, which is sadly a proprietary software, which is very similar to this. So it's quite common. And on Windows, there are also some very famous software like Notch, which is super complicated, but well, those are like a Mac or Windows only software, and well, it's not very cool if you value free software. Also on macOS, so macOS has a nice thing where you can also patch your hardware together like this. So you can say, okay, I have this keyboard which will go through this output port of my machine and blah, 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 blah visually. On Windows, you have to go on sketchy websites. This is a screenshot I took this morning with the Windows XP logo and install, like, I don't know what LG PC shoot or lower risk Trojan remover is, but it doesn't sound safe at all. And thankfully, in Linux, we have it a bit better. And interestingly, so a big thing is, so you'll see a lot of graphs, and graphs are pretty fundamental. And even if you take someone who plays guitar, he'll have a guitar pedal board with pedals connected by jacks, and it's always the same because it's what works for media art. And interestingly, on Windows API, since Vista is also based on a graph theoretically, but it's so complicated, I haven't seen anyone able to make some kind of software which leverages it, unlike macOS. It's important to explore the relationship of artists to this software, because media software aren't exactly like, Word or, I don't know, no, LibreOffice, or LaTeX. Like, these aren't productivity software. These are more akin to instruments. So there was some HCI, human-computer interaction research in the 90s, 20s, related to how artists interact with this software, and it was titled Instrumental Interaction. So if you want to search on Google Scholar, there is a ton of scholarly article about how computer scientists model artists' interaction with this software for making art. But in short, they use them more like instruments, like really a musical instrument, rather than a classical productivity software like Kmail or Evince or... So that's important to keep in mind, because it's a whole framework in which directs how everything is done in this field. So I'll talk a bit about what works well in Linux. Linux is super tunable and it's incredible. So every time I have to do a project, I refer to the Red Hat Enterprise Linux for Real-Time Tuning Guide, which has a lot of information on how to tune music software systems for low latency, things like that. For instance, if you're a musician, you don't want your sound rendering to take more than a few milliseconds. And trained musicians, they can hear 8 milliseconds, for instance. It supports kinda real-time, and it supports embedded. And that's a super common request I have when working with artists. They want to put some stuff in a museum installation, and they don't want it to move, so we put it on a read-only Raspberry Pi, and we render through EGLFS, and it's great. And there are a ton of embedded platforms which are specifically built for this, that our artists can just plug and play this, and they edit them through a web browser or something like that. So there's a Bella, there's Block something, I don't remember the name. There are some Linux distros which are really tailored for this. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go and check these links. But embedded is very important. So audio stacks, I'm running late, I think. Thanks to the people doing Pipewire, because it really solved a big hurdle, which is that we had free kind of 2 or 3 audio stack, or that was mostly Pulse Audio and Jack. Now we have Pipewire and it solves everything. Think that if you're on Windows, there is MME, there is WDMKS, there is Direct Sound, there is WASAPI, there is so the situation is really not better elsewhere. There's all ASIO on Windows. So here we have one thing which handles video, audio, MIDI, all that. We have nice software like PW Graph made by Renew Capella, which allows to plug everything like macOS, but macOS only does it for some specific kind of hardware. On Linux, it's everything. It's great. It also works for video, and finally gives us APIs that are critical for making media software. So artists love sending, for instance, video frames from one software to another. hopefully with zero copy, hopefully shared on the GPU. So two processes can share a single texture on the GPU on Mac and Windows. Thankfully, we can finally do this on Linux. And we have some great software available, free software, of course. So I'll talk a bit about mine. And proprietary software also. So for instance, Bitwig and Reaper are there, which are some of the main software used by proprietary friendly artists. DaVinci Resolve for making videos is great. And we have Unity 3D and Unreal Engine, which are two famous video game engines. And if today you go inside your Unreal Engine and you hit create a new project, you can create games, but also film, video, live events, architecture, automotive, product design. So only 1/4 of the target market of Unreal is games, actually, even though it's game engine. So that's pretty interesting to notice. I work at kinda at a computer science lab, and a few years ago we started work towards porting it entirely to a Linux stack. So, we dragged tooth and nails the artists who were used to their Macs to Linux, and they're starting to take a liking to it. And we even had some requests to then install them on their personal machines. So the screen looks like this. We have a lot of loudspeakers, and we do fun experiments. Hardware support is pretty nice in 2022. Mostly everything that artists need work. For instance, LibMotion, Kinect, these are sensing devices. For instance, oh, I didn't put my pictures. Okay, LibMotion allows to track the hand motion. Kinect allows to track the whole body motion, things like that. We are getting more and more up-to-date sound card drivers, so the situation is much better today than 10 years ago, really. There are a couple issues, of course. The biggest one is related to how DLOpen works. So on Windows, no, proprietary OS, it works. On Linux, so if someone wants to check that link to which addresses a very exhaustive list of issues, but the main problem is the symbol resolution order of things, and so we end up with that kind of thing because media software apps really rely a lot on plugins. Like for audio, there is a website, KVR, which references all the plugins for audio software. There's like 16,000. So it has to work. And right now it's more or less hard. For instance, you can pass this flag to DLOpen, but sometimes it will crash. There is DLMopen, which puts plugins in their own shared library namespace, which looks a bit like how Windows does it. It's also broken, and it's been broken since, I don't know, I found bug reports dating back from 2008, so... So people build against very small UI libraries which only draw very simple pix maps, and it's really not good. Oh, my images of Kinect and LibMotion were here. So this is what people do with Kinect, for instance, and this is what people do with LibMotion. Some issues with GUI, for instance, how does it work when a plugin was built against X11 and then you're on Wayland and you have Wayland a host, and how does it mix and match? Personally, as a musician, I have some artworks that use plugins that were made in the early 2000s, like the developers are dead for 10 or 15 years. And imagine a violinist whose violin will stop working because the manufacturer would have died 200 years ago. Of course, that doesn't work. And remember, I said it's instruments, it's not software. So it creates, really, retrocompatibility is super important. Working with some users, also mostly on Mac. I haven't seen it yet on Linux, but for instance, there was a talk about portals earlier. On Mac, for instance, it throws people off all the time to have a pop-up to allow access to the microphone, allow to move the mouse, blah, blah, blah. And another big issue is on Wayland, I'm a bit scared about something like AutoHotkey or HyperScript. So you are going to be very scared if you are security conscious, but on Windows, you can make a script that will catch if you hit some key press on some specific process. It's super important to be able to do this for some setup steps for art installations. I've seen this all the time on Windows and Mac, and it really has to be doable in Wayland in some way. There's the issue where there is not really a standard main loop also for plugins. Like on Windows, any plugin can send a message back to the Windows main loop on the main thread. Same on macOS. On Linux, well, there is glib, but it isn't supported everywhere. Not every system uses glib, so it's still a pain point. But I mean, we can still make things work. Distros, so I use app images. So I have nothing against Flatpak or Snap, but for this, it's really what's necessary. So a big reason is, first, it's easy to explain to artists. Go to the website, click download, you double click, and it works. And most importantly, you can easily ship multiple parallel versions. Like for artworks, you really want to keep the same version of the software that you used with the same data files. So if you made something with 3 years old versions, when you give the artwork in some museum, Biennale or whatever in 2 years, you really use the same version and you have everything on a folder in Dropbox with all the software versions you used. You download this folder, you click, it runs, and really, it's super important. So please keep this in mind. And so in my case, for instance, I use fairly optimized and customized libraries, so a lot of patches to Qt, whatever. The main software I develop, Score, I'll make a small demo. How much time I have left? Okay, cool, thanks. So I can slow down the rhythm a bit. It's 94 megabytes if you download the app image, and within there's entirety of Qt. There's LLVM and libclang because the software recompiles some C++ at runtime to optimize for the target user's PC. There's Boost, there's FMPEG, there's FreeType, Halfbuzz, and there's a lot of other libraries. So I know what you think if you are thinking about security, but I'll be honest, people in that field really don't care about security. Last time we made an assessment for some network protocol we were developing. People voted against using secure WebSockets because it was just too much work for users. They just prefer to have everything available all the time, all the ports open, and they just want things to work as easily as possible. Another thing which makes me a bit worried, so maybe the text is a bit small, but so this is one of the software I've developed. This is some of the distro packages that, so the packaging process for this distro, there is no name, but basically was setting out random lines until it compiled. Of course, that compiles, but that doesn't run really well. So with the app image, at least it works. So just to finish, so I've told a bit about the artworks in the beginning. So they were all made in Ossia, which is a software suite I've been developing for a few years, and so it's a kind of open sequencer which aims to be akin to the media sequencers available on other platforms. So it looks kind of like this. So basically, it's about sequencing audio, video, network controls, sending message through serial port visually. So it has to be visual. And to give an example, when I was working on it, we had some people with HCI background. And when they tested the software, the first rule was you don't touch the keyboard. You put the keyboard away. Everything must be doable by mouse. And that's kind of important in that field because a lot of the users are really non-technical. They are very good artists, but average computer users. So yeah. So I'll just make a very small demonstration of how it looks like. So I should have some time to build something. So how does making a media work looks like? So of course I forgot a bit of hardware to, I'm lost. So the idea is that you would say put some sound files in and say, okay, I want to play some sound, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's sound, cool. It's a bit loud. Okay, and so traditionally you will have audio software or video software, things like that, but here the idea is that you can mix and match V2 to render everything on like big video projectors. So let's say you want to show some data visualization of this sound on a screen. Then you will say, okay, hey, I want to add some visuals, blah, 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 visuals, generator, blah, something like this. And here you will look at things as graphs and say, okay, I want things to render. Okay, so these are some pretty simple visuals. And then you may want to say, okay, I want to use my sound to control my visuals. Something like this, for instance, blah, blah, blah. Tuk, 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 tuk. And tuk, tuk, tuk. And yes, not like this, but like this. Okay, and now I have some very simple visual thing. And then I can start adding some effects afterwards, for instance. Some glitch, for instance. Okay, so now it's starting to use some VHS-like thing, and well, then you can do pretty much whatever you want. If you want to use camera inputs, things like that, and well, it's all running on Linux, of course. It's also available on other platforms, and thanks to the nice hardware support we have nowadays, well, we can very easily connect to various protocols. We can use Wiimotes, we can use joysticks. I should have taken joysticks. I brought them with me from France, but forgot them at the hotel like an idiot. Send and receive messages from WebSocket, HTTP, send and receive textures from other software, so things like that. So this is only a very, very small overview of the field. Like there is so much more, and like I said, there's thousands of people doing that kind of stuff. So, well, thanks for listening, everyone. And so, even despite what I said, if you want to package software on your distro, on Flatpak, on Snap, I'll be super happy. And please get in touch. So, thanks. And if there is any question,
yeah, questions from the room? I see, Britt. You always have a question.
Cool.
So my background is in psychoacoustics.
Okay,
I come from a research laboratory. That's what I did my PhD in. When you were talking, I was having PTSD flashbacks when I was doing my PhD. So like we would readily have 18 channels of audio coming out of 18 separate speakers, and precision is so important. And we'd be collecting neural data and passing it through filters and various amplifiers, which is not too different than what you do with audio. When I was working in science, the scientific community was basically solving all of the same problems: packaging, distribution, library mismatches, and how to route audio, how to route data, how to route information. So it seems like the scientific community is solving in tandem all the same issues that the art community is solving in tandem, and they could work together, it would seem, because it's basically the same issues.
But actually, I think there is some good cross-pollination of ideas. So for instance, I know if some of you are using stuff with robots, there is robot operating system, which for communication, I think between modules for the robots, uses a protocol which comes from the art community, ossia, and we are trying to, well, for instance, we're part of some kind of consortium where we're trying to develop so there is a protocol for communication between apps, which is called OSI Query, which we implement, and a lot of media software implements. So it's basically UDP messages plus WebSockets, nothing very extraordinary. And regarding scientific software, I'm also working on another project regarding this, which is like a big problem is, for instance, the whole, glue code. Like there is so much glue code. For instance, if you want to develop an audio algorithm, then you have to wrap it for some audio analysis or retrieval system. So if you want to go check this library, Kinda solves this in C++, and you basically write your code. So it uses C++20, but we are able to do the entire reflection of a class without depending on any library. So this means that we can see, for instance, what are all the parameters of an audio algorithm, and then create plugins for Essentia or whatever audio system you may be used to. Cool. Okay.
Let me, yeah.
I have another question. Is the path into this to be a developer who gets into art, after they have already learned how to code and the Linux, or is it the other way around? Is it artists who then have to teach themselves to?
I've actually seen both. I've seen really artists, like 100% artists who did art degree, start to learn C++ because they wanted to do more than what the pre-existing blocks were able to do. So they really wanted to write their own stuff, and they manage it. Like really, honestly, like I've taught programming to classes of artists, and it was really, really super interesting to see what they were able to do. So, and I've also seen people who came from this arts background, and then they saw the wages in programming, and they say, oh, actually, and I have a good friend of mine who was contributor to Ossia now makes like more business apps, and so really everything is possible, and yeah.
All right,
Cool.
I don't
Thank
see any
you.
questions on the online channels, so let's wrap it up. Give the speaker a hand.
Thanks, everyone.
I will package your application later today.
Thanks.
We got a couple of minutes for that.